Elena Marsh had learned, over 3 years, how to make herself small in a palace built for someone larger than life. She was the mate of Cale Ashgrove, the alpha king of the Ashgrove pack, a man whose name alone could quiet a room full of wolves twice her size. When their bond was announced, the whole territory had called it a miracle. A human-born Omega, chosen by the strongest alpha in the northern lands, she had believed, back then, that miracles were built on love. 3 years later, she was no longer sure what the bond was built on at all. It was not that Cale was cruel to her. He was never cruel. He was simply distant, in the practiced, careful way of a man who has decided distance is safer than closeness. He gave her everything a queen should have: a wing of the palace, with windows that caught the morning light, silk gowns dyed the deep green of the Ashgrove crest, a place at his right hand during court. What he did not give her was himself, not his evenings, not his thoughts, not, she was beginning to fear, his heart. She told herself this was simply how alphas were raised, trained since birth to keep their softer feelings behind locked doors, even from the people closest to them. She told herself that patience was a kind of devotion, and that if she waited long enough, if she loved him steadily enough, the walls around him would eventually come down. She did not know that patience has a limit, and that hers was about to be found. The night everything changed began ordinarily enough. The Blood Moon Summit had brought generals and pack leaders from 3 territories into the Ashgrove halls, and the palace had been humming with tension for a week. Elena had barely seen Cale outside of formal dinners, where he sat at the head of the table like a statue of himself, giving nothing away. That evening, she decided to bring him his meal herself, the way she used to in the early months of their bond, before the crown grew heavier, and the distance between them grew wider. She carried the tray down the east corridor toward his private study, telling herself it was a small gesture, nothing more. Perhaps, she thought, it might remind them both of a time when things had felt easier. The study door was not fully closed. Through the gap, she could hear Cale's voice, low and controlled, speaking to 2 of his senior generals. She should have knocked. She told herself that many times afterward, in the long nights that followed. She should have simply knocked and walked in. Instead, she paused, tray in her hands, because something in his tone made her want to understand what troubled him enough to keep him locked away for hours at a time. The mating bond was necessary for the treaty, Cale was saying. It secured the border and silenced the southern packs who wanted an excuse to move against us. That is all it was ever meant to do. One of the generals said something Elena could not quite hear. Cale's answer came fast and flat, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. I never loved her, and I never will. The tray slipped from her hands before she realized she had let go of it. It struck the stone floor with a crash loud enough to silence the room beyond the door, but Elena was already walking away, her feet moving faster than her thoughts, carrying her back down the corridor, before anyone could open the study door and find her standing there. She did not cry that night, not where anyone could see her. She had learned, in 3 years at Cale's side, how to keep her face still even when everything inside her was breaking. She returned to her chambers, closed the door, and stood very still in the center of the room, waiting for the shock to pass into something she could manage. It did not take long for her to decide. She had spent 3 years hoping for a love that, by his own words, had never existed. She would not spend a 4th year the same way. She packed only what she needed: a single bag, a few plain dresses, enough coin to see her through the first weeks of whatever came next. She left behind the silk gowns, the jewelry gifted to her at court ceremonies, everything that marked her as the Alpha King's mate. On the windowsill, catching the last silver light of the setting moon, she left the mating pendant Cale had placed around her neck on their bonding day. It felt strange to take it off after 3 years, like removing a piece of her own skin. But she did it anyway, and she did not look back at it as she slipped out through the servants' passage and into the cold night air. The border sentries knew her well enough not to question the queen when she said she wished to walk the grounds alone. By the time anyone thought to look for her, she was already beyond the palace walls, following the old trade road that led out of Ashgrove territory to toward the transport station 3 miles east. Cale did not learn she was gone until the first gray light of dawn. He had worked through the night finishing summit business, and it was only when he returned to his chambers, meaning to apologize for missing dinner again, that he noticed the study floor still bore the marks of a shattered tray no one had cleaned away. He found Elena's chambers empty. Her gown still hung in the wardrobe. Her jewelry still sat in its case. But her small traveling bag was gone, and so was she. It was the pendant on the windowsill that told him what had happened, before anyone spoke a single word to him. He picked it up, and for a long moment he simply stood there, turning the cold metal over in his hands, piecing together what she must have heard and when she must have heard it. The study door, the tray on the floor, the words he had spoken to his generals the night before, words meant for their ears and no one else's. Because the truth, the one Elena had not stayed long enough to hear, was far more complicated than the sentence she had caught through a half-open door. The Southern Pax had grown suspicious of Elena in recent months, watching the bond between her and Kale with cold, calculating eyes. A human-born mate was seen by some as a weakness in Ashgrove's line, a soft point that could be pressed if war ever came. Whispers had reached Kale that certain generals from a rival pack meant to use Elena against him, not through violence, but through leverage, through threats aimed at her, to force his hand in the coming summit negotiations. To protect her, Kale had done the only thing he could think to do. He told his own generals, men he was not fully certain he could trust with the truth, that the bond was purely political, that Elena meant nothing to him, beyond the treaty it secured. He believed that if his own court saw her as insignificant, the rival packs might lose interest in threatening her at all. It was a lie built entirely to keep her safe, spoken in a moment when he believed she was nowhere near enough to hear it. He had never imagined the walls of his own palace would carry his voice to the one person he had been trying to protect. Kale did not wait for guards or an escort. He left the pendant on the table and walked straight to the stables, saddling his own horse while stable hands scrambled to keep pace with him. His advisors caught up just as he swung onto the saddle, urging him to consider what it meant for a king to chase after his mate like a common man, with no dignity to protect. Kale did not slow down long enough to answer them. He rode out through the palace gates as the first true light of dawn broke over the eastern hills, following the trade road Elena had taken hours before, praying he was not already too late. He found her at the border checkpoint, exactly where the transport to the outer territories would soon arrive to carry travelers beyond Ashgrove land. She stood a little apart from the handful of others waiting there, her bag at her feet, her eyes fixed on the horizon rather than the road behind her. She looked, he thought, like someone who had already decided not to look back. The sentries at the checkpoint straightened, at the sight of their king arriving alone and out of breath, but Kale paid them no attention. He crossed the distance between himself and Elena on foot, leaving his horse behind, and when he reached her, he did not reach for her hand or demand that she return with him. He knelt instead, right there in the wet morning grass, in full view of the border guards and the handful of early travelers who had stopped to stare. "I lied," he said, before she could turn away from him. "What you heard was a lie I told to protect you, and it was the worst mistake I have made since becoming king." Elena did not answer right away. She had spent the night walking away from him, and 3 years before that, convincing herself that his silence was simply the shape his love took. She was not ready to believe, on the strength of a few words spoken at dawn, that everything she had overheard was untrue. "You told your generals you never loved me," she said quietly, "and that you never would. I told them that because I was afraid of what they would do to you if they believed otherwise," Kale said. "There are packs who would use you against me, Elena, threaten you to control me. I thought if my own court believed you meant nothing to me politically, they would stop watching you so closely. I was wrong to think a lie could ever be small enough not to hurt someone." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the calculated calm he wore so easily in council meetings, the mask he had perfected over years of ruling a pack that expected strength above all else. She did not find it. What she found instead was a man kneeling in wet grass at sunrise, stripped of every formality that usually stood between them, saying words he had clearly never allowed himself to say where anyone could hear. "I have never had to fight for anything the way I have had to fight for you," Kale said. "Not the crown, not the treaties, not the loyalty of my own generals. Loving you was the one thing that came easily, from the very first day you stood beside me at the bonding ceremony. I was so afraid of losing you to the games other packs wanted to play, that I nearly lost you to my own foolishness instead." Elena felt something in her chest loosen, just slightly, though 3 years of careful distance were not undone by a single confession spoken in front of strangers. She thought of every dinner he had missed, every night he had disappeared behind the study door without explanation, every small moment where she had told herself that silence must simply be love, wearing an unfamiliar shape. "You could have told me," she said, "instead of shutting me out and letting me believe I was something you tolerated instead of something you wanted." "I know," Cale said. "I thought protecting you meant keeping you at a distance from anything dangerous, including the truth. I did not understand, until I found that pendant on the windowsill, that the distance itself was the danger. I was so busy guarding you from outside threats that I nearly lost you to the one I created myself." The morning light had fully broken over the hills now, gold spilling across the grass and turning the frost at their feet to a fine, glittering mist. The transport that would have carried Elena away was approaching in the distance, its wheels audible on the packed dirt road, and still she had not moved. "I am not asking you to come back because I am your king," Cale said, rising slowly to his feet, but keeping his eyes level with hers. "I am asking because you are the only person I have ever wanted beside me, not for the treaty, not for the border, not for anything the crown requires of me, only because it is you. If you still choose to leave, I will not stop you, but I needed you to know the truth before you went." Elena looked past him, toward the transport drawing closer, then back at the man kneeling in the grass moments before, now standing before her with nothing left to hide behind. She thought of 3 years of silence, and one morning of honesty, and wondered which one truly told her who he was. She did not answer him with words at first. She reached down, picked up her bag, and set it back on the ground beside her, rather than lifting it to carry with her onto the transport. It was a small motion, but Cale understood it instantly, and something in his shoulders eased for the first time since he had found her chambers empty. "I am not doing this because I have forgotten what I heard," she said. "I am doing this because I want to believe there is more to us than a lie spoken through a study door. But you will have to show me, Cale. Every day. Not just at dawn, in front of an audience, when there is nothing left to lose." "Every day," Cale agreed, "for as long as you will let me." He held out his hand, not as a king commanding his queen to return, but as a man asking the woman he loved to walk beside him. Elena looked at his open palm for a long moment, before finally placing her hand in his. They walked back toward the palace together, as the sun rose fully over the Ashgrove hills, past sentries who had watched their king kneel in the grass at dawn, past travelers who would carry the story to every corner of the territory before nightfall. Whatever doubts the court had once held about the human-born Omega who shared their Alpha King's bond, none of them remained by the time Elena and Cale passed through the palace gates, hand in hand, with the truth finally standing where the silence used to be.